Today we're going to look at descriptive and prescriptive models of problem solving. Groups are used all the time to solve problems. Companies are meeting weekly, doing assessment, deciding how to get better, making decisions about new products, how to market those products, how to get the resources or import the resources they need to make them, etc. All kinds of problems are being solved. And as we watch groups in action, we will first of all discuss the descriptive view of groups. We're going to call this a descriptive approach, how groups tend to go through different phases. When they start on a problem, work through it, have some conflict, and finally make some decisions. Now, the descriptive approach is based on research. Researchers have noticed that most groups actually go through about 4 different phases. We'll look at those shortly. And before we do, after we get that done, we're going to be focusing then on prescriptive models that show how groups can solve problems, different ways of doing it, that step-by-step models that tell you, well, if you do each step correctly, you'll probably have a good outcome. So before we look at the prescriptive models, let's talk about what researchers have noted so far. There's been a lot of fascinating research on groups, and a lot of studies exist on this. And one of the things that's come out of these studies is the consistency in what they say about group processes and how groups tend to move toward their outcome or their solution. The first phase that groups undergo is called the orientation phase. And this is where you have some primary tension. Now, primary tension is when you feel nervous, when you don't know what to expect. You're new with the group and you're worried. You're ill at ease. You're not really ready to be yourself necessarily or open up with what you really think. So groups have to work with that awkwardness. And then they start communicating about the issues, and you have some discussion about some of the issues, and they become familiar then with their problem. And it doesn't take too long, though, and I think most of you have probably experienced this, that a conflict phase arises as the issues begin to emerge. Even issues about leadership. Who's going to be the leader of this group? Is the leader doing okay, or do we maybe need to replace this leader? So you can have some of that going on, where there's actually leadership conflict. You can also have some disagreement about what prescriptive model to follow or what method to take to solve the problem. Someone may want to do it one way, somebody else may want to have another task force take this job on and then make a recommendation. Or maybe the group wants to assign somebody or assign a task force themselves to go and work on something and do some research and interviews of others in the organization. But regardless, this phase of conflict involves some differences in personality, some differences in goals, differences in how to solve the problem, differences in leadership and who's the best leader. And we're going to call this secondary tension. When there's this argumentation going on, power struggles, competition, rivalry, different argumentation that goes on between people with different views, this secondary tension can become a major issue. Particularly if there's personal conflict involved, where people get upset at each other, disrespect each other, and then take it personally. And after this conflict phase moves along and things settle down, researchers have noticed that most groups will sort of emerge out of that conflict with some peace and quiet and more clarity. Somehow all that chaos has produced some clear roles where people have actually stepped up and started doing the things the group needs done. Some have started asking good questions. Some have been providing more information. Some are supplementing the leadership or assisting the leadership as emergent leaders, trying to harmonize everybody, trying to coordinate things. And these types of things happening in this emergent phase are what get the group to get focused and actually move toward a solution. And finally, that solution comes where they make a decision about how they're going to proceed. And once that occurs, we're ready for our last phase. The last phase is what we're going to call reinforcement. The group, once it makes a decision, isn't really ready to do anything yet, but they sort of look around and discuss it. How do we feel about this? Are we happy with this? Or are we not happy? Do we feel like we've done something good here? Or are we a little worried about this, that maybe this might be a huge mistake? The group actually reinforces the decision that is made and usually finally reaches a satisfaction level where they feel some unity as long as they're comfortable in this phase. Now that we've looked at the descriptive way that groups operate, we're going to look at some forms of prescriptive models that actually help us make good decisions. In particular, I'm going to narrow today's lecture just to 3 that I find most useful and recommend highly and actually suggest using in groups I'm involved in. The first of these is going to be called brainstorming, which is a very useful tool anytime groups are making decisions or when we're collaborating. Brainstorming often is the tool we use to come up with new options we didn't think of before as we think out of the box, where the creativity actually takes us into some new area where we have options we didn't even realize we had. A second model I'll look at will be reflective thinking from John Dewey. It's a very commonly used and very excellent model of decision making that's simple and easy to follow. The third is going to be one that's less used and a little bit more difficult to understand. We call this the ideal solution model that has 4 steps. Let's look at brainstorming first. One of the neat things about brainstorming is when you have a disagreement with someone else, and maybe you have differences of opinion about how to spend your time vacationing. It could be that one of you wants to do some driving through nature where the other one just wants to lay on the beach and in the sun and do very little at all. Not drive and travel, but just relax. Just get out in the water and get wet and just enjoy some good food and just sort of hang out. So you can have these kind of differences of opinion. Brainstorming is neat because it allows you to look at both of these 2 options and possibly come up with a neat way that you can travel and maybe stop at some different beaches. Like, where are the 10 best beaches in the United States? Let's travel and see 3 of them. And so both people are enjoying what we're doing. One is enjoying the traveling, the other is enjoying the beaches. And you sort of mix it up so that it's a collaborative win-win outcome. Just yesterday in one of my classes, one of my advanced classes in business communication, I created 2 genius teams for a genius bar exercise, sort of after the Apple stores. And I let 2 captains pick people from the class to be on their team. And then I assigned them a difficult problem to solve. The problem was where there was an individual by the name of Jack, hypothetically, who had taken over for his dad in the company. And he tried to have an open door policy, and it didn't work too well. People got upset at him because he made some huge mistakes. He didn't listen to people when they came in his office. And eventually, the open door policy created more trouble than it was worth. So I assigned both teams to see what they would do, first of all, to diagnose his mistakes, and second, suggest solutions, how to fix it. And that's the problem-solving aspect. Well, both teams approached it almost oppositely. One team looked at the personalities and the people that were upset and realized that he had done some social damage in the social realm, which we're going to call group building and maintenance. He didn't do well with his people skills. And so they suggested he apologize, say he was sorry, and try to do a better job of looking him in the eye and listening and paying undivided attention as he continued to use his open door policy. Now, the other group looked at it totally different. They felt that he set himself up for failure by inviting people to come any time of the day and just interrupt his work. And no matter what he's doing, somebody could just come in and suggest something to him. And this could frustrate him. So they suggested that he have a special time of the day when he have an open door policy. And that way he wouldn't have to worry about interrupting them, cutting them off, or not listening. And after it was all over, I had to, as the judge of this Genius Bar team competition, I told them honestly, both teams looked at it oppositely, came up with very different alternatives, and even focused on different problems. One focused on people problems, one focused on task problems. And I said, you know what? You're both winners. But the best group is putting both of the teams together. If both teams would have been one team, you would have had the best solution of all. Now that's an example of two different teams brainstorming, where they went through the steps of brainstorming. In other words, let's go through those steps. First, you identify the problem, and I provided that to them. Second, you suspend judgment. No matter what someone says in your team or group, you accept that idea without any reservation, put it on the list, and keep all ideas. Third, you generate as many solutions as possible and keep discussing things until no more ideas emerge, until you have a list of a lot of ideas, many of which are maybe bad ideas, some are good. Fourth, you encourage people merging ideas with other people. Then we're going to call this piggybacking. When you do collaboration, if you can encourage people to piggyback off somebody else's idea and create hybrid ideas, that's phenomenally brilliant because it takes the group out of the box to these kind of ideas I was suggesting before, such as the vacation trip where you travel to 3 beaches and you do both traveling and relaxing. And it's piggybacking that allows you to sort of create those neat hybrids that allow both people to win and feel really happy about that, excited they get to share each other's goals and meet them while having fun themselves. Now the 5th step of brainstorming is just to take some good notes so you can see everything on a piece of paper, and lastly, to evaluate your options and pick the best solution. Well, that's brainstorming. I encourage you to consider using it and especially follow the norms and guidelines that I suggested about writing things down, being patient, encouraging creativity, piggybacking, and being non-evaluative. Now let's look at John Dewey's model. That's called reflective thinking. John Dewey was in the education field and is quite famous for the 5-step reflective thinking model. Probably you've had this in school maybe more than once. And it's a really neat, simple model to follow, and it has some very logical steps that you can always sort of do no matter what problem you're facing. The first thing you do is just identify and define the problem. And once you've figured out what it is you're trying to do or what your goals are, and maybe what's standing in the way, you analyze the problem. You sort of look at how we can get this, what are the causes of our problem, and maybe how can we fix it, or what resources do we have? What are our options? What solutions are there for the problem? And that's the 3rd step, generating several possible solutions. And it's sort of like brainstorming here where you're providing several different solutions as options. And that's where discussions comes into play. You discuss the pros and cons of each solution and come up with the best solution of those alternatives. And then lastly, step 5, test and implement the selected solution. I want to take a little bit of time now for one more prescriptive model of decision making, and this one's a fascinating one that you're not going to find in too many places, but it's called the ideal solution format, and it involves answering 4 questions. First, what is the problem? So the group has to just see if they agree on what the problem is. What is it they're trying to do as a goal when they tackle this problem? Where are we trying to go with this? What is it we're trying to deal with? Second, if we did find an ideal solution, what would that solution look like? What goals would have to be met or needs for us to all be happy with this solution and consider it ideal? So this is where we have to incorporate everybody's goals all in one step. And this helps us set goals for when we're going to finally realize we've gotten to where we want to go. The 3rd step is changes. What do we have to change to get to our solution? In other words, do we need more resources? Maybe we have to think of some creative way to expand our resources. And to get more resources, maybe we should ask another department to go in with us so we have twice as much money and maybe twice as many people, and that will allow us to do what we're trying to do because we don't have enough resources to do what we're trying to do. And that's just an example of that, expanding resources. Another one is the last step of this model is what's the best solution? In other words, which solution of the ones we have best approximates the ideal solution we described earlier in step 2. Have we found something that matches the criteria we set for ourselves? And if so, we're ready to move ahead. Okay, well, we've discussed 3 prescriptive models now. We've also looked at descriptive aspects of problem solving. We're ready now to start looking at some more advanced concepts and even look at groupthink.